Hello and welcome back to this session of Talking Tech, Women and Girls in ICT. My name is Lella. I'm 16 years old and I'm the youngest IBM champion for 2021. This fancy title reflects my work in the digital inclusion sphere with a focus on creating opportunities for underserved and underrepresented communities. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Rebecca Mace, a philosopher of technology and educational researcher. Intriguing, right? So before we begin, I'd like to quickly reintroduce the Talking Tech series for our listeners and those joining us for the first time. Talking Tech is a series created to celebrate girls and young women globally who are interested in technology, being recorded between Girls in ICT's Day 2020 and Girls in ICT's Day 22, which is an international day of celebration dedicated to encouraging girls and young women to consider studies and careers in the growing field of information and communication technologies. This year, Girls in ICT's Day was held on the 22nd of April. The Talking Tech series is brought to you by the ITU, UNICC, and the Office of the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, and is in support of Equals, the global partnership of gender equality in the digital age, all with a mission to interest and inspire girls and young women about the plethora of existing ICT careers through presenting current women in STEM from a range of roles to our audiences, to offer alternative experiences of how ICT is being used to support achievement of the UN SDGs, and showcase existing initiatives dedicated to enabling young women and girls to explore the careers of the future, to name a few. Once again, I'm Lella. I'm 16 and passionate for tech for good and closing the digital divide. Through my work, I strive to diversify the industry by creating more opportunities for young people, particularly those of minority groups and with non-traditional academic backgrounds, highlighting the important role that young people play in technology and the wider society. I host regular talk shows and work on incredible initiatives designed entirely for, with and by students. And you can find out more by visiting ibm.biz/student hub, which is my global community created in collaboration with IBM, and by visiting ibm.biz/studentx, which is my bi-weekly student talk show. So as you know, I'm really passionate about digital inclusion, ethical technology, and social impact. So I'm delighted to now get Talking Tech with Rebecca. Welcome. Would you like to quickly give us a rapid fire introduction to explain how you fit into the world?
So I'm not a traditional techie. I've come from a philosophy background and I'm a philosopher of technology. So I'm currently based at UCL, but I've also spent time as a research associate at the University of Oxford's Digital Ethics Lab, which was really interesting because we were looking at all kinds of different ethical issues surrounding AI and social media and things there when I was there. But I did spend the vast majority of my career until quite recently just as a teacher of philosophy. I then recently set up Human Digital Thinking with a colleague of mine, who was the former director of cyber at GCHQ, Sally. And so we now run training courses and consult for large and small businesses about digital risk, about how digital identity fits in and what cyber trust is, essentially. And we are developing an AI tool, which is to help transform, or well, to help level the playing field within the education sector for people who've got cognitive neurodiverse issues. And we would like to, our mission is help people become future leading rather than future proofing, essentially. So we focus on connecting values and beliefs and looking to go with digital strategy and making sure that there's enough range in the room, enough different voices so that we're not excluding people from the conversation, and encouraging people who are working in business, the military, and in education to ensure that there's a huge range within the room, basically.
Really interesting stuff. And I like how you mentioned, being proactive rather than reactive to ongoing change. And that's something I definitely do, in the sense that, rather than studying computer science at school, which I'll go into a bit later, by taking up courses and gaining the skills that I know are in demand by employers, that's kind of helping my future self rather than waiting for them to say, hang on a minute, you need to go back and do that training. So it is, as you mentioned, kind of future proofing yourself.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. We're trying to actually sort of change the narrative slightly. So rather than future proofing, you're future leading. So you're in the narrative, and it's ensuring that, particularly in the education sector and young people especially, they often get presented with tech and told, there you go, you can use this amazing thing now, but they haven't been involved in any of the development of that tool. I love watching young people basically break technology and use it in a completely random way that was never intended. And often they are the most interesting ways of using tools. But within the education sector, teachers have a history of being told things sort of from a top-down approach and introducing all kinds of different things into the curriculum. So I work a lot with teachers now to make sure that they're at the cutting edge of the technology when it's being developed, to put their ideas and their thoughts and their values in the system, so that we're not kind of just generating tools which someone who's never worked in a classroom thinks will be useful, or someone who hasn't been in a classroom since they were at school thinks will be useful, because things have changed a lot. So yeah, it's about future leading and taking charge, taking the reins essentially, so that when people are then in business, they can be useful and have got a valuable voice. Which I think also it's interesting, people like with your role at the IBM and stuff, where you're the voice of coming through into business now, your kind of generation are the ones who will be future leaders. Some of what I do is like a translator between the people who've been in industry for a really long time and don't understand the world that your generation are coming out of. And it's often quite difficult. There's an assumption that you'll know everything about tech, or that you will then, and you're from, they'll know nothing and you'll know everything, and there's a divide or an issue, there's a space there that needs a translator almost to be, well, why would they know everything? Or maybe some people know how to use things but don't understand the inherent risk of using those things. And that's a changing narrative that's going on at the moment, which is quite interesting. Yeah, what would you say your main milestones then have been over the last few years?
That's definitely a crazy question to answer, because the past 18 months have been completely anomalous. I went from studying so hard for my GCSEs to be told literally in a matter of hours that they were cancelled. And I really went from taking what were the traditional qualifications of my GCSEs to thinking, right, how can I best upskill myself for this ongoing digital transformation, and ensuring that not only myself, but other young people remain at the forefront of it. So the main milestone for me definitely has been overcoming that adversity, building grit and resilience in the process, and creating initiatives such as the Student Hub and Student X, which I mentioned a bit earlier. Initially, they are your kind of dream classroom environments where we've got industry teaching you rather than waiting for textbooks to be updated, and it's really using tech to teach tech. And I've really loved doing that. Just because the pandemic closed schools physically, I didn't want that to stop my natural curiosity and to stop me from keeping learning. If we look at the more professional side of things, just this week on Monday, I received the Diana Award for my efforts to kind of close the digital divide and bridge the gap between industry and the classroom, which you mentioned, all down to my initiatives and collaboration with IBM, as well as other smaller organizations such as STEMettes, who work with young women and non-binary people to help them upskill and take up and gain a further interest in STEM subjects.
That's really interesting, because you're not doing future proofing, are you? You've gone, let's pivot on what has happened and lead from the front. This is what the world's going to look like now, or my world is going to look like now. That's really interesting, because I think a lot of people did try to fit how the world pre-pandemic looked into what the world, sort of the shape of the world now, and it just didn't quite fit at all. It's a different shape now. Sort of how we're negotiating space is quite interesting. And I also found that really fascinating. I mean, I spend a lot of time working regarding digital identity with social media, and just looking at the sorts of platforms that became more popular with the pandemic. So often young people get a lot of bad press about social media and how much they're online and isn't this terrible. But looking at the sorts of platforms that young people were using changed very quickly at the start of the pandemic to being the group chat type things. It was like they were desperate to talk to each other real time. It wasn't about posting plastic pictures of perfect lives. It was the human contact element. And I think often it's the human contact element that is somehow, I don't know, it's missed out of the conversation, because essentially tech is this enabler of connection and community in just a different way. And it doesn't have to replace it, but it can augment it in situations where we can't physically get together. So we can't physically get into a classroom, but you can create a version of that. It doesn't have to be the same. It can be a different version, but it can be a placeholder or something that's different and fulfills a similar purpose, but doesn't have to completely replace it. And that's really important. And it's good that you've still had those milestones, because I think lots of young people have missed out on major milestones, because exams are a pretty big deal. And to not have those formal life steps, sort of steps in life, rites of passage, as it were. It's quite a difficult thing to have to get your head around. And if you haven't got formal qualifications, what do you do? What, you know,
For sure.
or if you've
Yeah.
got, but your whole cohort was, you know, everyone knows that it's the kind of asterisk COVID after your GCSE results or A-level results, then it's quite strange to have that. But again, you can see that as, oh no, we're this missing generation, or you can see it as something really positive. Well, I had all this time that I could do something else in, or I didn't have all this time because I was doing something else and I was caring for people and looking after my community and setting up amazing groups and hubs and things where you can kind of get other people together in a different way, like you were doing. So it's opened opportunities as well as closing people's opportunities.
For sure. And my head teacher has dubbed the GCSEs being cancelled, A-levels being cancelled kind of generation as the remarkables, because to be honest, I really do think we've overcome a lot. And if anything, we are now stronger people who aren't tied to a future roadmap, but we're more adaptive and responsive to kind of the world around us and are able to pivot very quickly. And I think that those skills, although we did have our exams cancelled, it's those kind of habits and attitudes which have helped us grow to be better people in turn. And it was really, really inspiring on Monday to see all the people who've received the Diana Award for so many incredible initiatives that they founded, albeit helping people in their local community, all the way to doing things like I've done at a global scale, where I'm 16 years old and I've been working with 9-year-olds, primary school leavers, all the way up to PhD graduates and industry experts alike. So definitely, although the pandemic was definitely quite a scary experience, it still is ongoing, of course, I think that it has kind of made us better people, and it allowed me to reconnect with things which I perhaps didn't have the time for when I was so bound to that revision timetable. So there are definitely so many benefits from that. Moving on to another question, we mentioned human digital thinking and the social impact and kind of tech for good ethical side of that, which I'm really fascinated by. Would you like to tell us a bit more about how that work ties into the UN Sustainable Development Goals?
Yes, I work mostly with the education sector. That's where my background is. So it's where I'm kind of most comfortable. And part of that work is from a strategy perspective, ensuring that if schools are going to employ tech, that they're using the tech to support human ends, that it's not replacing teachers. We're not kind of have the march of the robots or anything like that. And that actually by putting technology in, you're making people's lives better. You're not just assuming that the technology will automatically do that, which I think is a danger. So I'm personally especially interested in leveling the playing field for gender, as well as for those who've got neurodiverse issues like dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, that kind of stuff. So one of the things that we've developed ourselves is an AI tool which works specifically with students who've got autistic spectrum. They're also people who've got Asperger's and dyslexia, dysgraphia. Something else I've worked on is I consult for a company that does AI marking for essay-based subjects. So English literature, GCSE, and language they've been doing testing on recently, which is very positive. That's come as a result. Ofqual came up with a statistic that something like 50 to 60% of grades for English literature didn't agree between two human examiners. They just weren't the same mark. And if you think about it, if that was that mark, if it was a level 4 that you needed to achieve and two people have disagreed and you end up with a level 3, that can have massive ramifications for the rest of your life. You'll either have to take time out to resit it, or it can prevent you from moving on career-wise. And so we've been developing sort of introducing tech as an augmented checker, and not necessarily to completely replace human markers, keeping a human in the loop, but just to keep that kind of base level equal process and to ensure that the social mobility isn't affected by someone's opinion, essentially. So what we try and do is keep inclusivity and equality as core values, and just make sure that the values of a company are those, and that they're using tech to ensure that that's what's going on, really. And we just keep humans at the kind of the forefront. So we rehumanize the dehumanizing elements of technology, and keep reminding everybody that, you know, tech can be this amazingly powerful tool for connection, but we also are in the danger of thinking it can, you know, it's automatically going to be better than people. And often it works really well alongside people, but you've got to remember that humans are in the loop. So yeah, and digital risk is something else that I spend a lot of time in. But in terms of making sure that the risk isn't unfair for certain groups of people, or that certain groups of people aren't being shut out of because of the strategies or policies that have been introduced into education or into the military or in whichever sector we're working in. So
that is, yeah, so incredible work, and really important that we do ensure like that equity of access. So it's not just the fortunate few evolving in this transformation, but rather we're helping everyone so we can all innovate and grow together. And your mention of such a wide variety of different sectors which you're working with to use technology really reflects the synergy, which I'm a big supporter of, that you can be a hacker, a hustler, a hipster, or a humanitarian in tech. And rather, instead of just using technology and thinking, right, I must be maths driven and data heavy, alternatively, you can just use tech as a catalyst for whatever it is you're wanting to create, or whichever sustainable development goal best relates to your work or your interest. So I really respect that.
Yeah, I've always been a philosopher, and so people laugh when I say that I'm a philosopher of technology, because it's generally assumed to work in tech you need to understand all of the bits and bytes, which is not my background at all. And so I've heard various phrases of kind of anthropologists of the digital, that kind of thing, and studying human behavior and how humans behave around technology and how technology impacts on human behavior is an area which is becoming increasingly important, because we are being impacted as humans by technology, and we need to make sure that we're comfortable with that. But it's, yeah, you don't have to be someone who can code or whatever. Yes, it's useful, but you don't have to go down that route if you want to work in tech. And I certainly came to the tech, my epiphany of tech late in life. So yeah, I still can't turn my own TV on sometimes, but just that, so the philosophy side of it has always been what's interested me throughout. So I mean, I expect you're really good at coding, aren't you? Do you do tech-based subjects, or what do you study?
So at school, although I learnt to code at the age of 8, I now only study English literature, history, and politics. And I'm hoping to study something like politics, philosophy, and economics at university next year. So yeah, really not very STEM related at all. And as you mentioned, people are like, well, how can you call yourself a technologist? Because those subjects don't sound very STEM related at all. But I honestly think that we do need more people like ourselves who are humanitarians in tech, or philosophers and tech, anthropologists, as you mentioned, because if the boardroom and the decision-making process is just reflective of one particular group of society, then the solutions that you're actually creating aren't going to be relevant to the actual majority of people. So I think it is so important we have more humanitarians, and instead of letting tech kind of consume us and letting us think that you have to look one particular way and go down one particular route to get to your tech related career, rather just finding a career with purpose and passion is what I would prioritize over a particular subject or a particular university course.
Mm-hmm. I definitely think as well, with the way the world of work is going, people aren't going to, you're not going to have one career now. So you could spend a lot of time making sure you're qualified up to the eyeballs at 21 in this particular route, and then only do it for 3 or 4 years. And then you've kind of cut out a load of other things in the process of that. So if you are generally following what you're interested in, you will end up hopefully finding a career you're interested in. And maybe you can add on other bits and pieces. Something I tried doing, I was in a fortunate position where I could, but about 3 years ago, I just said yes to everything. So I have ended up doing a whole range of fascinating things, just because people would say, oh, are you free to do this? Could you do that? Can you speak to this person? And that was how I ended up, working with governments, working with the military, working with education, setting up business, that kind of stuff. So I think if you're open and curious and keen to just explore people, it's keen to explore the people that you meet in the tech world, but work out how it is you can make a connection with them, then yeah, be open to what's out there. Because definitely studying one subject isn't going to unlock the whole of the career world for you in any.
Sure.
And also technology changes so much. If you're not aware of why you're in it, you won't enjoy it, because you'll just feel like you're behind all the time. So
that was the frustration for me. I know that obviously computer science as a curriculum does provide that foundational knowledge, and I have done both the GCSE and ICT and computer science. I did the ICT a bit earlier because I was just so tech savvy. Yeah, I just think that disconnect between what I know real-time technology looks like and the very, as we mentioned earlier, data-driven, maths-heavy textbooks and the curriculum did just demotivate me a bit, because it made you that hacker, whilst I wanted to be the hustler and the humanitarian out of the 4 H's which we mentioned. So for sure, I think there's so much more to tech tech than just what the curriculum may suggest or what stereotypically you may associate with STEM subjects. And I really look forward to further exploring that, as you mentioned, saying yes and just seeing where that takes you, because although people often think their roadmap is that one route and you'll be in that one career and almost go on that revolving process of going from one career to the next career to the next career, I want to take the detour and see what it's like in the other way and have an explore and just be creative and say yes and stay curious.
So what is your dream career then? If you had to...
My dream career, honestly, I think that the careers of the future are yet to be defined. I think the past 18 months have really shown us how quickly time can change, and the divides which we've seen with the digital divide pre-existing has only been exacerbated. So having the ability to find purpose and passion in my career is what I want more than anything. I have enjoyed speaking at such events with the United Nations and International Telecommunications Union more recently. So something relating both my humanitarian interests and tech is definitely something that I'd look to. But yeah, for now, I'm just staying curious and saying yes to see where that will take me.
Yeah, I think not having one career path plan, because you might get to the end and the jobs have dissolved or there's not anymore. So
it definitely was like that with the exams, taking my revision timetable, which I thought, right, this will get me from this point to this point. But then in a matter of hours, they're like, nope, that's not happening. So you're like, oh, what do I do now? So being able to be more adaptive and responsive to the times around us are really what I think is most important.
Yeah, there's certainly, I mean, growth mindset is a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot. And the idea that, you know, if you just can't do it yet, I think we need to also caveat that with sometimes there's a pandemic. And yes, you might work really hard at a thing and you just, you know, keep persevering at it and you can't do it yet. But then a pandemic comes along and takes away any chance, you know, you've missed the window or it's not going to happen. And so being able to take what you have learnt and being able to adapt it and change and be open, I think is the only real way forward any of us have got now in terms of managing to negotiate our way through the world. And ultimately we're dealing with people, and it's, if you can manage to deal with people and find a group of people, find your tribe, then that's great. But also don't only deal with your tribe, make sure you've mixed it up and have got a broad enough kind of outlook in life that you can speak and communicate and talk and reach other people who you wouldn't naturally bump into or naturally wouldn't find. And that's something that's fascinating. If you say yes, you will. If you say yes to everything, you will find these people out there you wouldn't normally have bumped into or encountered. So that's a top tip, I would say, definitely. Mm-hmm. So what would you say, and then, well, maybe as well as saying yes to everything, what would you say would your advice be to people of your age who are looking for careers in technology?
I definitely think being unapologetically yourself and asking and adopting the art of kind of blue sky thinking and just thinking like, what would my dream be and how can I make that happen is so much more powerful than thinking of like job descriptions or a particular role or particular route that you should go down. I mean, the role and the position that I'm now in, I never expected would even exist the moment my exams were cancelled. So by, as you mentioned, saying yes, asking for anything. And I really do think that if you don't ask, you actually don't get a lot of the time with such opportunities. And perhaps it isn't the right etiquette or whatever that may be. But I think that there are so many people out there, and by actually just being proactive rather than reactive and saying, hey, I want to learn more about this area of tech. My school course doesn't cover it. Would you mind jumping on a 30-minute exploratory call to discuss this a bit further? I think that you will find that more and more people would rather say yes rather than just say no. And if anything, it doesn't harm just asking, like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You just get a no. So definitely just being proactive and asking is so important.
Yeah, from the business end of the thing, I found in the last year or so, pretty much everyone will give you an hour of their time for free. So, you know, you can have some really interesting conversation, and the broader range of conversations you have, the more your own little cogs in your brain start kind of whirring and connecting dots that maybe other people haven't connected. And I've found, having had multiple conversations with people, where I think a connection that I've made is a connection everyone else has obviously made. And then it suddenly becomes, oh, you mean that isn't a thing that everyone else does? But coming from sort of cross sector, cross industry, different position, different place in the world, different, everyone's got something valuable to add. So never let your age or your experience or lack of experience or whatever else make you feel like you haven't got anything to add, or make you feel like, they wouldn't be interested in speaking to me, because often you're the kind of curveball that comes in that reframes everything, gives everyone a kind of new perspective. So yeah, I think that's really interesting, just to bear in mind you could be the key that unlocks something for someone. So it's not just a one-way conversation. Often, like, you're just as useful to the business leaders or whatever else that you're speaking to as it is to you to speak to them. That makes sense.
Oh, for sure. And even though you might not have the fanciest job title in the world and you're just still a student, I think that our voices are just as powerful as those industry leaders, because if they're wanting to create a solution about students, whether it be something like what I'm working on, a student initiative to help us take up more tech skills and take up tech careers of the future, why make those decisions about us without us? And ensuring that all the content that's being made on projects that I'm working with is entirely for, with, and by students is something that's been so important to me. And I really hope that we see in the long term more industry and more sectors adopt, because by adopting the art of youth inclusion and other cognitive diversity in the respective areas, I think it is just so essential, because we are the experts of being young people in that sense. And just as you'd seek a medical advisor to help you when you're unwell, why not seek a young person when you're trying to best empathize with what being a young person in this digital first generation really looks like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And not just picking one young person either, picking 10,000 young people. And
for sure, yeah.
So
and that's what I've been pleased to do. In summer, I created Z Students, which was this summer series of events where instead of having industry leaders speak to us and just have them be there and just presenting heavy slides and not really leaving much time for real interaction, we've rather had them speak with us, where we'll ask everyone to join a Zoom meeting where we can all have our cameras on and microphones unmuted, and it be as much like a classroom environment as possible. And not only did I then launch that, but as we all returned back to this new normal and we went back to school and schedules changed, I went to share my skills forward by creating a committee where we had students from across the globe. I think we had about 20 different students from all different academic backgrounds and at different stages of their professional roadmaps. And it was just so great to hear so many different points of views and find out about new technology together. And it was so much more eye-opening than that traditional classroom environment. And that is just the beauty of technology, that even though we were all physically isolated, the community which we then went on to create was greater than you'd ever have in person.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there were huge numbers of children who were not able to access technology at all.
Sure, yeah.
But for those teachers who did somehow pivot, and for people who were in careers that pivoted completely to online existence, for them to be able to create that sense of community online is a skill. And I hope it's something that is taught more formally with the moving forward, as to how to create a kind of sense of an online community. Because some people like yourself sound like you've got a knack of doing it and you're able to make everyone feel comfortable and in the room. But I wonder if it's something that we need to spend a bit more time thinking about in the business world or in teaching, training and that kind of thing, is how do we foster this sense of belonging in an online space? And it might be it just comes more naturally to people who spend more time online. There's various studies and things that are coming out at the moment about how people aged sort of 16 to 24 are happier spending time with their friends online than in real life. And
yeah, I saw that. I think 60% of primary school students would rather text a friend than speak to them in person, which is just bizarre to me, who's this real chatterbox, I talk to anyone kind of person, but really is showing you the way the world's going.
So maybe that's something we need to factor into training if we're working for people who have never encountered that as completely an alien world. Maybe that needs to be part of business planning or teacher training or whatever else is going on. Or maybe we need to do the training the other way, so everyone's back comfortable speaking in just as much in real life. I know some universities in America, I think, are running kind of remedial courses in face-to-face, how to be in a seminar with other people now when people are coming back to university. They don't know how to behave in a group or read body language in the same way. So in both directions, we need to be looking.
Another question. You highlighted that you're creating content on digital identity. Why do you think that this is such an essential factor in preparing for the future workforce? And what do you think that industry leaders and everyone alike must do more or less of?
Yeah, digital identity, we're leaking data constantly. So we are creating these digital footprints, digital selves unintentionally and also intentionally. So there's a digital identity that maybe you'll set up on an Instagram and it's very curated, or that you'll have a LinkedIn and it's all kind of, you're very professional on it and you've got a particular angle you're going for. And that's really deliberately kind of created. That's great. But then we're also leaking all this other stuff about ourselves unintentionally, just by going on different websites, that kind of stuff, maybe being tagged by our friends in things which doesn't fit with our kind of professional image, or that's maybe we've set up a separate group and we're in a WhatsApp group or something with people that we're closer friends with. So you don't need to worry about looking a particular way. Stuff doesn't always stay private that you would expect to be private. And then there's so many more CCTV cameras around than there've ever been before. There's the Internet of Things. So even if you think you are not a presence, there'll be a lovely U-shaped hole in the world. So your neighbours both sides of you might have Internet of Things connected houses and you're the only one in the street that isn't. It doesn't matter anymore that you're not on the Internet of Things because the neighbours' houses will have CCTV and the light switches and the power surge and all that kind of stuff being monitored. So your digital identity can be created whether or not you intend it to be or not. It's very hard not to have an internet presence nowadays. And if you don't have one, people are immediately suspicious. So there's a reason why you're not on the internet often, which is, I think, is really interesting. So we need to be more aware moving forward that our online and offline have become one and the same. We've had merged existences now due to the pandemic as well. We see into people's houses, like I can see in the background of yours, you're kind of in my home right now, that kind of thing. And you've had experience of seeing inside teachers' houses, which you would never have seen before. So those kinds of things, there's this merging now between work and home and school, that kind of stuff. It's different. And then this kind of, it's something we just need to be more aware of in terms of privacy now, what counts as privacy, where we draw our boundaries, what we're comfortable with people knowing about us and not, the tone we're taking when we're online, how we negotiate maybe Twitter debates with people that, how do you do that? What's your motivation behind having those discussions? So lots of our digital identity, I think, will continue to work it out as we move through this time, about where lines get drawn, about what we're comfortable with knowing, maybe in one context where we're not comfortable with other people knowing. And you see it a lot, obviously, in the press with famous people, politicians or celebrities who've overstepped a mark culturally. But, it's something I think that we'll all probably experience at some point or another. I heard a thing about Twitter. Apparently everyone gets their 15 minutes of fame, but the game of Twitter is to not be that person. So you don't want to be the person who's got the famous retweets and all of that on Twitter, because often it means that something's blown up in your face and either you've said something bad or you've been misunderstood or you've gone viral for the wrong reasons. So I think that probably is something we'll need to be spending more time thinking about, how we not create fake identities, but how we merge our online and offline effectively.
For sure. And unlike a lot of my peers, I only use Twitter and LinkedIn for professional purposes only. I don't have an Instagram where I post what I ate for breakfast. It's rather, I post on Twitter what event I'm speaking at. I publicize great podcast episodes like this. It's kind of shaping the world and your online personal brand to be what you'd want your head teacher to see of you. What do you want your future employer to see of you? And yes, my Twitter bookmarks may contain funny memes or things or political things that I relate to, but I share those with people who I trust rather than the wildest strangers who, as you mentioned, there is that kind of there's that nuance almost between what is reality and what is the online world in that sense, and working out where those boundaries are and where is the limit as to what you share online. And it definitely, with the pandemic, it's only making it more and more difficult to see those boundaries. It is becoming much more hazy.
Yeah, I'm talking at a conference next week actually about how to be real in a virtual world. Authenticity is overused as a phrase, but to keep that real you, the sense of a real you, and you're not just kind of pushing out one version which isn't you at all or isn't anything related to your actual life, to keep it real, but also to be aware that it's still virtual. There is maybe a version of you you're presenting, but let's try and keep that version still like the version you would present to your headmaster. You're not turning, or your headmistress, you're not turning up as a pretend you. It is a version of you. It's just one particular aspect of you. Is it Janus, the god that looks both ways, the Hindu god? That I like, that looking forwards and backwards all the time. So with your virtual self, you need to have your head that goes both ways to check which direction you're looking in. Are you looking forward to, because time speeds up, slows down, can last forever on the internet, but equally it can go viral very quickly. So having that kind of foresight and hindsight at the same time about what you're posting is really important.
I really like that analogy. And I even think looking at how we teach PSHE at school, I don't know what the equivalent would be in the US and other areas, maybe like citizenship lessons, social studies, that sort of thing. It's looking at maybe how we can alter that to have a focus on the digital world. We often talk about like cybersecurity and e-safety and a very kind of keeping yourself online, not talking to strangers style, but maybe we need to look at those bigger areas of how you portray your best and most authentic self online, that's not only pleasing to the people that know you most, but also the wider community on that platform. And yeah, how you can best that goddess, in the sense that foresight, hindsight, are you checking both ways before you go and post something which perhaps may haunt you in years to come?
Have you come across Marie Kondo, who does the
house organizing woman?
Yeah. I like to think of that kind of, you can Marie Kondo, she's got a tech version where you can Marie Kondo your actual art, like physical tech stuff, but I kind of
take a look.
I think in my head of Marie Kondoing your digital self, so making sure that the things on there bring you joy still. So if you hold them in your hands as if they are actual artifacts, actual things, and or piece of clothing or a photograph or whatever, and hold it and think, does this bring me joy? If it does, I'm keeping it. If it doesn't, if I don't stand by that opinion anymore, it doesn't represent who I am. It's just it doesn't bring me joy. It doesn't bring any happy memories. There's no point in keeping it on there. That's my kind of message at the moment, I think, in terms of,
and I definitely think that. I always look at something online, I think, is that serving me? And I think of the mantra, like, let go of that which no longer serves, whether it's opportunities that I'm applying to, things I'm committing myself to, people that I follow online, making sure that after all, you're not just doing things to please, but rather it's everything that you're wanting to do, and it does relate to that roadmap of finding purpose and passion in your career. This has been so insightful. Considering the focus back to girls on ICT, what careers advice do you think you would offer to your younger self or those just getting started? You've touched on so many great things already, but what would be your one-liner note to your younger self?
Gosh, my younger self, I think when I went into teaching, I thought that was my career. I'd just be a teacher. It's been fascinating because there's been threads now where I'm looking back to my undergrads and I'm revisiting, and I actually have visited them the whole way through, and I can see them now with hindsight, how the kind of feminist lecturer that I really didn't like at the time, but there's stuff now I'm writing about in my own research that I'm finding has been sort of in terms of cyber feminism. It's really interesting, and I wasn't really in the tech world back in my undergrad, so looking at the threads now where I have followed the passion, I followed the thing that I really loved. And yes, I was in teaching and I thought I was going to be a teacher forever, and I was able to pursue that by teaching philosophy. But then realizing that what I was really interested in the philosophy is what makes us human. And then the digital world was encroaching on that more and more. And now I've made that my kind of where I'm at, and I've changed the way that I'm working in education slightly. There's still that thread though. So the thread hasn't been based on a kind of formal career structure, as it were, but the threads have been based on me as a person, that I've gradually pulled out what it is that I love about each job that I've done, and have just worked on making that bit a bit bigger in my life each time. So identify, I mean, this is probably going against what every careers teacher ever says, don't just pick the things you like. but I did go with what really kind of set me on fire. I always have done. It brings a lot of energy to my life. It means that when I wake up in the morning now, I don't feel like I have a job per se. I just do the things that interest me. And yes, there's things which are a bit annoying, but definitely I think if you can find the threads of your life, and you'll pick them up as you go through, that really kind of fire something inside of you, and try and hold on to those and knit them together into something where you can see a gap, where you can see that some people need that, or need that thing, or maybe just need your energy, then that's a good way of progressing, I think, in a career. And also be prepared to work for free. Not forever. At some point you do need to have a conversation about money, but I have, even now in my massive age that I am now, I have spent a lot of time, because it was interesting, and I will do it for free, because I think it's either going to make a difference to someone else or I'm gaining from it. And therefore it's worth doing for free, because as much as they might think, oh, this is great, we've got someone on board to do this job, I'm gaining from it by being part of that, or meeting those people, or being a small cog in a much bigger process. So definitely be prepared to work for free. Sorry.
So much great advice there. And I think that we often talk about networks and the skills which you can gain, even though you may not be working. Even though you're working for free, you're actually gaining what's considered like STEM capital, where you've actually got networks and got that real-time experience for the future. And talking about that thread which you mentioned, it actually relates back to kind of how we talk about writing essays at A level, in the sense we talk about having that line of argument, which is a thread that you see and it goes in and out throughout your answer, so you have one cohesive argument. But it's actually, in this sense, the thread of purpose and passion in your career. You can definitely tell I'm an essay humanitarian, honestly.
Absolutely, yeah, the humanities expert there.
My teachers would be pleased, I'm sure. So everyone, that brings us to the end of today's session of Talking Tech, Women and Girls in ICT. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for your time and valued insight. I know I've certainly learned a lot from today's session, and I really hope that our audience have felt the same. To continue the conversation, you can find me on Twitter at Lella. I think you can see my little @ sign there, and you can find Rebecca at HD_thinking and/or Becky _Mace. So thank you all for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode.